My own sister watched me claw my way across the floor, fighting for breath, and told me I was being dramatic. By the time I got to the hospital, I thought the nightmare was over. I was wrong. The cardiologist's quiet words didn't just save my life. They exposed a betrayal hidden in my family for decades. My name is Martha Ellison. I'm 38 years old, and I spent most of my life believing I was the fragile one, the sensitive one, the one who felt too much, needed too much, and was ultimately an inconvenience. It took a collapsing heart and a doctor's hushed, horrified words in a sterile hospital room to show me the terrifying truth. My fragility wasn't my flaw. It was her weapon. Before I dive deeper into this story, please take a moment to subscribe, like, and share it. Your support truly helps me bring more emotional and unforgettable stories to life. I always love hearing from you. So tell me in the comments what part of a sibling relationship you think is the hardest to repair once it's broken. Your words and reactions inspire me more than you can imagine. And when we finally reach the end, don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10. I read every single one and it means a lot to me. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. I grew up in Brighton, a coastal town in Oregon where the fog clings to the pine trees until noon and everyone knows your business before you do. My world was painted in the soft, worn colors of my mother, Anna. She was a watercolor artist, her hands always stained with faint blues and gentle yellows, her voice a constant, soothing melody. And then there was Elaine. 4 years older, she existed in stark, contrasting black and white. Where I was soft curves, she was sharp edges. Our childhood wasn't filled with screaming fights or dramatic slaps. That would have required a heat, a passion, that Elaine simply couldn't spare for me. Her resentment was a slow, constant drip of ice water. It was in the way she'd agreed to babysit me, then spend the entire evening reading on the couch, telling me to be quiet, that I was bothering her. It was in the gifts she'd give me. A sweater 2 sizes too small, a book on a topic she knew I hated, wrapped in a smile so sweet our mother never saw the sting. She had a phrase delivered with a sigh that sounded like profound disappointment. "Oh, Martha, not again." I heard it when I scraped my knee, when I cried over a lost toy, when I struggled with math homework. She crafted a narrative brick by invisible brick, that I was a problem to be managed, a burden, and like a fool I believed her. I started apologizing for my own existence. Sorry for needing a ride. Sorry for being sick. Sorry for taking up space. Mom would gently chide her. "Elaine, be kind to your sister. It's just sibling tension." But mothers see their children through a lens of love, and sometimes that lens filters out the sharpest truths. I felt it though. The darkness behind Elaine's eyes when Mom would praise my drawing, or hug me a little longer. It wasn't just annoyance. It was a cold, deep-seated jealousy that I was too young to name. Life moved on. I married young to James, a kind but distant man who ultimately left, saying he was tired of living in the shadow of my family drama, which was his polite way of saying he was tired of Elaine's toxic presence at every holiday, every crisis. My small print shop, the Coastal Press, became my sanctuary. It was mine. The smell of ink and paper, the rhythmic hum of the machines. It was a world I controlled, a world Elaine had no interest in. She'd become a successful, if notoriously difficult, real estate agent. She dealt in properties, in concrete assets. I dealt in words and images, in things she considered frivolous. After Mom passed 5 years ago from a sudden, devastating stroke, the last thread of forced connection between Elaine and me frayed. We spoke only when necessary, our conversations clipped transactions. I lived in our childhood home. Mom left it to both of us, but Elaine had already bought a sleek condo downtown, and she would drop by unannounced, usually to criticize something. The overgrown garden, the dated wallpaper, my life choices. That November, the air turned sharp and the sea growled against the cliffs. I'd been feeling off. A pressure, deep in my center, like a heavy fist, was slowly clenching around my heart. I blamed the shop's financial stress, the loneliness of the big empty house, the lingering grief for my mother and my failed marriage. I told myself it was all in my head. Elaine had spent a lifetime telling me my feelings were exaggerated, and I had become my own worst enemy, repeating her mantra to myself. The evening it happened started like any other. Dusk came early, painting the living room in shadows. I was sorting invoices, that familiar, uneasy pressure blooming beneath my ribs. Elaine let herself in as usual. She was there to pick up some old tax documents of Mom she claimed to need. She settled into Mom's favorite armchair, a move that felt deliberately pointed, and scrolled through her tablet, the blue light etching harsh lines on her face. And then the world shifted. It wasn't a pain, not at first. It was a terrifying emptiness, followed by a wave of such profound, crushing weight that the breath was punched from my lungs. My vision tunneled, the edges going dark and speckled. A cold, terrifying numbness slithered down my left arm. This was not stress. This was not in my head. This was my body screaming a final, desperate warning. I stumbled into the living room, one hand clawing at the doorframe for support. Elaine glanced up, her expression one of pure irritation. The casual chewing rhythm of her gum was the loudest sound in the world. Elaine! The word was a wet gasp. Call 911. She didn't move. Her eyes flicked back to her screen. I'm in the middle of something, Martha. What now? I slid down the doorframe, my legs betraying me. The carpet rose up to meet me. Please, my chest. I can't breathe. The terror was a live wire in my veins. She finally looked at me properly, and she rolled her eyes. That familiar, infuriating smirk twisted her lips. Oh, for heaven's sake. Stop overreacting. You always want attention at the worst possible time. Her voice was a venomous snap, cutting through the fog of my panic. Get up. You're being dramatic. The cruelty of it wasn't just in the words. It was in the practiced ease of them. This was a well-worn groove in our relationship. Martha is dramatic. Martha is sensitive. Martha is imagining things. She was not seeing a woman in medical distress. She was seeing an annoying script she'd rehearsed for decades, and she was delivering her lines with cold perfection. I tried to speak, to form a coherent sentence that would break through her disdain, but only a weak groan came out. I was on the floor now, the pattern of the rug pressing into my cheek. The pressure in my chest was becoming a blinding, white-hot agony. I began to crawl, each movement a monumental effort, toward the front door, toward the possibility of a passerby, of hope. Elaine's voice followed me, rising in volume, not with concern but with fury. What are you doing? Get back here. You're going to embarrass us. Do you hear me? Martha, stop this nonsense right now. Her words were like lashes. I kept crawling, my fingernails scraping against the wooden floor. The 10 feet to the front door felt like a mile. I reached up, my numb fingers fumbling with the lock, the chain. The cold night air hit my face as I pulled the door open and half tumbled onto the porch step. The last thing I saw before the darkness fully swallowed me was the concerned, round face of our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Calloway, peering over her hedge, her watering can frozen in her hand. Her mouth formed a perfect O of horror. Then sirens. Blurred faces above me. Bright lights. The sensation of being lifted. And through it all, a sharp, clear sound cutting through the muffled chaos. Elaine's voice talking to a paramedic. I told her it was just a panic attack. She's always been like this. So hysterical. This is so embarrassing for the family. In the ambulance, with an oxygen mask over my face, the world narrowed to the beeping of machines and the paramedic's calm, focused eyes. I floated in a strange, detached place. But one thought, clear and cold, settled in my mind. She left me on the floor. She watched me crawl and she was angry. The emergency room was a blur of activity and fluorescent glare. Tests were run, wires were attached. Elaine appeared in the doorway of my curtained-off bay, her arms crossed, her designer handbag hanging from the crook of her elbow like a shield. She looked out of place, annoyed by the institutional setting. Are they done with you yet? She asked, as if I were a car stuck in a slow repair shop. I have an early showing tomorrow. A young doctor with kind eyes and a tired face came in, holding a clipboard. He introduced himself as Dr. Alistair Reed. He asked Elaine to wait outside. She huffed but complied. Dr. Reed's demeanor shifted from general concern to a focused, sober intensity as he looked from his chart to me. Martha, he began, his voice low and deliberate. The ECG and your blood work are telling a very specific story. What you experienced was a serious cardiac event. You have a condition called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. He paused, letting the clinical term hang in the air. It's a thickening of the heart muscle. It's often inherited. Inherited. The word landed like a stone in my stomach. He leaned forward. This doesn't just happen out of the blue. You've likely been having symptoms, shortness of breath, chest pressure, dizziness for months, maybe longer. Has no one in your family ever mentioned a history of heart conditions, especially sudden or unexplained events? I shook my head, confused. My mother, she had a stroke. That's what we were told. Dr. Reed's brow furrowed. He looked at my chart again, then back at me. You're from Brighton. Your mother was Anna Ellison. A chill that had nothing to do with the hospital air crept up my spine. Yes. He was silent for a long moment, a conflict playing out behind his eyes. Martha, I need to speak with your sister. Is that her outside? Yes, but why? It's important, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. It was a tone that held more than medical curiosity. It held a dawning professional horror. He stepped out, and I saw him approach Elaine, who was checking her reflection in her phone screen. I saw her posture stiffen. I saw the practiced, dismissive smile fade from her lips as he spoke quietly to her. I saw her face illuminated by the harsh hallway lights, pale to the shade of old paper. She didn't look at me. She stared at Dr. Reed as if he were pointing a gun at her. He led her to a small private family room across the hall. The door didn't close all the way, and in the quiet, sterile hum of the hospital, their voices, though hushed, carried. Miss Ellison, your sister has a serious, genetically inherited heart condition. Her records indicate your mother was a patient here for cardiology. I've pulled the files. Anna Ellison was diagnosed with the same condition over 15 years ago. She was being monitored. There are notes here about genetic counseling, about informing and testing next of kin. Elaine's voice tight and defensive. I don't see what that has to do with this. Dr. Reed's voice firmer now, laced with something I can only describe as restrained anger. The notes from your mother's final appointment state that she was deeply concerned about Martha, that she was preparing a letter for her, to explain the family history and the urgency of screening. The nurse's note says you were present at that appointment. You were advised directly of the risks to your sister. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence from the room. My own heart, the sick one in my chest, hammered against my ribs. She knew. She was there. Mom was trying to tell me. Dr. Reed continued, his words precise, surgical. The stroke your mother died from was likely a complication of this same cardiac issue. It was a known risk. Martha should have been screened years ago. She should have been on medication. She should have been warned. This episode tonight was preventable. Then Elaine's voice, a brittle, breaking thing, but not with remorse, with exposed fury. It wasn't my responsibility. My mother always babied her. Martha always got everything, the attention, the sympathy, the love. Why should I have to clean up that mess? She would have just worried and made it all about her, like she always does. In that moment, the last illusion shattered. This wasn't just neglect on a terrible night. This was a deliberate, years-long concealment. My mother's love, her final act of protection meant for me, had been intercepted and buried out of sheer poison jealousy. Elaine hadn't just refused to call 911. She had, in a very real sense, been waiting for this, hoping for it. The door opened. Dr. Reed emerged, his expression grim, his professional composure barely containing his personal disgust. Elaine stalked out behind him, her eyes blazing. She didn't look at me. She looked through me as she always had, but now the mask was gone. The cold, ugly truth of her was laid bare under the fluorescent lights. She opened her mouth, perhaps to spit another accusation, another justification. But I spoke first. My voice was weak from the ordeal, but it was clear. It was final. Get out. She froze. It was the first time I had ever commanded her. Not pleaded. Not apologized. Commanded. Martha, you don't understand the whole. Get out. I repeated, each word a stone dropped into a still pool. Don't come back. For a second I saw it. A flicker of shock in her eyes, the realization that her control, her narrative was irrevocably broken. Then the familiar mask of contempt slammed back down. She straightened her coat, lifted her chin, and without another word turned and walked away, her heels clicking a sharp, angry rhythm down the linoleum hall until the sound faded into nothing. Dr. Reed came to my bedside. He looked exhausted. I am so sorry, Martha. What she did. It's unthinkable. I didn't cry. I felt empty, scooped clean of the old aching sadness. The weight that had been crushing my chest wasn't just the failing muscle. It was the weight of her lifelong lie. And with her exit, with the truth exposed, it began to lift. The real healing, the terrifying, painful, and powerful healing could finally begin. But this was only the end of the beginning. The truth was out, but its echoes were just starting to reverberate through the life I now had to rebuild from the ashes. The silence after Elaine left was deeper than any I had ever known. It wasn't empty, it was full. Full of the beeping monitors, the distant page for a doctor, the low murmur from the nurse's station. But most of all, it was full of the echoing truth Dr. Reed had just laid bare. It hung in the air of the curtained bay, a specter more real than the four stand next to my bed. My body felt weak, trembly from the adrenaline crash and the cardiac event, but my mind was terrifyingly crystal clear. Dr. Reed pulled a chair close. His kindness now felt like a lifeline thrown to someone stranded in a sea they never knew existed. "We need to focus on you now, Martha," he said, his voice steadying. "We'll start you on medication immediately. There are lifestyle adjustments, monitoring. This is manageable. You can live a full life with this condition. You should have been living it with this knowledge for years." The word should cut with a fresh pain. All the years of unexplained fatigue I blamed on my sensitive nature. The dizzy spells I called anxiety. The chest pressure I attributed to stress. They weren't character flaws. They were ignored warning signs. A map my body had been trying to give me. A map my own sister had stolen and burned. The letter. I whispered, my throat dry. My mother's letter. Dr. Reed nodded slowly. "From the notes, it seems your mother was adamant about it. It was to be her final explanation to you. A way to guide you when she was gone." He looked toward the door where Elaine had vanished. The medical advice was clear. Your sister was informed. Her choice to withhold that. It's beyond unethical. It's a profound betrayal. A nurse came in to check my vitals, her touch gentle, her smile warm and impersonal. The normalcy of it was jarring. The world continued to turn on its axis while mine had just been knocked clean off its orbit. When she left, I looked at Dr. Reed. "What do I do now?" "You rest. You heal. Physically first," he said. "Then you decide what you need to do for your peace. Do you have anyone else? A partner? Close friends?" I thought of James, my ex-husband. He'd been worn down by the constant Cold War with Elaine, by my own ingrained apologetic for her behavior. I thought of a few friends from the shop, but they were more like cheerful acquaintances. In making myself small to avoid Elaine's criticism, I had isolated myself. My closest confidant had been my mother, and she was gone. The realization was a fresh, lonely ache. "I'll manage," I said, and the words felt like a promise to myself, not just an answer to him. I was kept overnight for observation. The darkness outside the hospital window was absolute. A void that matched the one opening inside me. But for the first time I wasn't afraid of the void. The monster that had lived in its shadows had a name now. It was Elaine. And she was no longer in the dark with me. She was out there in her perfect condo and I was here alive. The simple fact of my survival felt like an act of rebellion. The next morning, under a bleak, rain-washed sky, I was discharged with a stack of prescriptions and follow-up appointments. Mrs. Calloway, bless her soul, had called the hospital and insisted on picking me up. She was waiting in the lobby, a small, sturdy woman in a bright yellow raincoat, holding a thermos. "Chicken broth," she declared, pressing it into my hands. "Homemade. None of that canned nonsense." In her old, comfortable sedan that smelled of lavender and wet dog, she didn't pry. She just talked softly about her garden, the new librarian in town, the forecast. Her simple, undemanding kindness was a balm. As she pulled up to my house, she finally paused. "I heard some of what she said, Martha. On the porch. Before I called." Her wise old eyes met mine. "Some trees grow twisted not because of the wind, but because they choose to grow toward the darkness. You don't have to stand in their shade anymore." I squeezed her hand, tears finally welling up, not from the betrayal, but from the unexpected grace of a near stranger. "Thank you, Mrs. Calloway." The house felt different when I walked in. The living room where I had collapsed was just a room. The rug was just a rug. The ghost of that night was still there, but it was a fact now, not a haunting. The first thing I did, ignoring my fatigue, was go to my mother's old writing desk. A beautiful battered roll top that had been in the family for generations. Elaine had never shown any interest in it. She preferred modern, minimalist furniture. This was Mom's space, and by extension it had become mine. My hand shook as I opened it. The familiar scent of old paper, cedar, and the faintest hint of my mother's rose hand cream rose to meet me. I started with the obvious places, the drawers, the cubbies. I found sketches, old bills, bundles of letters from friends, recipes. No sealed envelope addressed to me. I knew Elaine was thorough. If she had taken it, she wouldn't have left it lying around here. Then I remembered the secret compartment. A tiny spring-loaded panel at the back of the top drawer. A trick my grandfather had built in. Mom had shown it to me when I was a teenager, a gesture of shared intimacy. She kept her most precious stamps there, she'd said. I had forgotten about it entirely. My fingernail found the almost invisible seam. I pressed. With a soft click, the panel slid sideways. Inside wasn't stamps. It was a single ivory-colored envelope, crisp and clean against the dusty wood. My name was written on the front in my mother's elegant looping script. For my Martha, when you need it most. My breath hitched. Elaine had searched the desk, but she hadn't known about the compartment. She hadn't shared that secret with Mom. This was the one thing she couldn't steal. I took the letter to the window seat, where the weak November light fell. I opened it with a reverence that felt sacred. My dearest Martha, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and the time has come for you to know a truth I should have spoken aloud much sooner. I was afraid, my darling girl, afraid of frightening you, of burdening you with a worry I carried like a stone. I have a heart condition. The doctors call it hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. It is something I was born with, and it is something I could have passed to you. I have been monitored for years. It is serious, but it can be managed with care and attention. Elaine knows. I brought her to appointments, thinking her strength and practicality would be a support for us both. I see now I may have been mistaken. Martha, you must get your heart checked. As soon as you can. Do not ignore any strange feelings, a flutter, a pressure, shortness of breath. Do not let anyone tell you it is just your nerves. You have a gentle spirit, but your body must be heard with a scientist's ear, not a poet's doubt. Promise me. There is another reason for this letter. I fear the dynamic between you and your sister is my greatest failure. In trying to soothe her sharp edges, I may have neglected to armor your soft heart. Her jealousy is a deep old river, and I could never find its source to dam it. She resents the love I have for you. A love that is simply different, not greater. She sees your sensitivity as weakness, when it is your profound strength. Please do not let her define you. Do not let her minimize your world. If she has given you this letter, then perhaps she has found her way to kindness. If you have found it yourself, then trust your own strength, my love. You are far more resilient than you know. You have a quiet courage that does not need to roar to be real. Take care of your heart in every sense of the word. It is a precious, capable thing. Oh, my love forever. Mom. I read it 3 times. The first time I wept great, heaving sobs for the mother I missed, for the warning that had never come, for the lost years. The second time I felt a hot, clean anger, at Elaine for her theft but also at myself, for being so easily convinced of my own insignificance. The third time I felt something new settle in my bones. A solemn, unshakable resolution. My mother was speaking to me from the past, giving me the permission I never knew I needed. Do not let her minimize your world. I placed the letter back in its envelope and held it against my chest, right over my healing and perfect heart. This was my truth, my property, my starting line. The following days were a strange, quiet whirlwind. I followed Dr. Reed's instructions meticulously. The medication left me tired but clear-headed. I hired a local teenager to help with the heavier tasks at the print shop, a sweet boy named Leo who treated the vintage press with awe. I began taking short, careful walks along the cliff path, the vast, gray ocean reminding me of scale, of time, of things that were powerfully real beyond the small, dark drama of my family. I did not hear from Elaine. The silence was a gift. But the truth, once loose, has a way of weaving itself into the fabric of a small town. I hadn't told anyone except Mrs. Calloway and Dr. Reed the specifics, but enough people had seen the ambulance, had heard snippets. The story began to mutate in the way small-town stories do. I heard from Leo that his mother heard at the grocery store that Elaine had a big fight with her sister and left her in a bad way. The specifics were blurry, but the judgment was clear. Elaine's behavior was seen, finally, as unacceptable. A week after I came home, Detective Paul Vance came to my door. Paul was a few years older than me, a friend of my father's before he passed, a man who had always given me a kind, avuncular wave. He looked uncomfortable, holding his police cap in his hands. "Martha," he said, "I'm sorry to bother you. Can I come in for a moment?" I led him to the kitchen, put the kettle on. He sat at the old oak table, his large frame making the chair seem small. "This isn't an official visit," he began, his voice gentle. "This is Paul, your dad's old fishing buddy, okay? But we got a call. From the hospital. A Dr. Reed." He felt obligated, given the severity of the concealment of medical information. He filed a report. For endangerment. I sat down slowly. I hadn't expected this. The law getting involved made it all terrifyingly concrete. Now, prosecuting something like this, it's tricky. It's her word against yours about what she knew and when. But the medical records place her in that room with your mother and the doctor. The nurse's notes are clear. Paul sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Elaine came into the station this morning. Preemptively. She's lawyered up with some hotshot from Portland. She's spinning a tale about you being mentally unstable. About her being a concerned sister who was protecting you from a scary diagnosis you couldn't handle. She's saying you're twisting a family tragedy to smear her reputation. The old narrative. The final desperate play of her script. But the audience was different now. I didn't get upset. I felt a cold, clear certainty. I went to the writing desk, retrieved my mother's letter, and placed it on the table in front of Paul. "Read it," I said quietly. He put on his reading glasses. His lips moved silently as he read my mother's words. I watched his face change, from professional neutrality to deep sadness, then to a hardened anger. He finished and took off his glasses, looking at the letter for a long moment. "This is dated just weeks before Anna passed," he said, his voice thick. This is evidence, Martha. Of intent. Of her knowing exactly what she was doing." "I don't know if I want to press charges, Paul," I said, and I meant it. The thought of a long drawn-out court case, of having to see Elaine, to have my life and my mental state dissected in public, it felt like giving her more of my energy, more of my heart. "I understand," he said. "But you should know, having this, it changes everything. It means she can't control the story anymore. The truth is right here in your mother's handwriting." He tapped the envelope. "Can I make a copy of this? For the file? It might be enough to dissuade her from pursuing any defamation claims against you or Dr. Reed." I nodded. "Yes, please." He made a copy on my small home printer, carefully handling the original as if it were a sacred text. Before he left, he turned to me. "Your dad would be proud of you, Martha. Anna too. You're standing your ground. It's the hardest thing in the world to do against family." After he left, I realized he was right. This wasn't about revenge. It was about ownership. Owning my story. Owning my health. Owning my life. The legal threat was just noise. The real battle had already been won the moment I crawled to that door and chose to save myself. That evening, as I was sorting type in the quiet of my shop, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I felt a chill, knowing instinctively who it was. I answered but said nothing. "Martha." Elaine's voice was there, strained, stripped of its usual condescending sweetness. It was just raw bitter tension. "We need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about, Elaine. Paul Vance came to see me," she hissed, "with a copy of a private letter. How dare you weaponize Mom's memory like that? She wouldn't have wanted this." A calmness settled over me, a calm I had never felt in her presence. "She wanted me to have that letter. You stole it. You hid a life-threatening truth from me. You watched me crawl on the floor. There is no talk that fixes that. There is only one thing left for you to do." "And what's that?" she spat. "You need to get used to the silence, Elaine," I said, my voice even and quiet. "Because it's all you're going to get from me from now on. Forever." I ended the call. I blocked the number. I walked over to the large window of my shop, looking out at the dark, rainy street. My reflection looked back at me. A woman alone but not lonely. A woman standing straight. The weight was gone. In its place was a space, vast and a little terrifying, ready to be filled with whatever I chose. The next part of my life wasn't about her anymore. It was about the next heartbeat, the next sunrise, the next project in my shop. It was about discovering who Martha Ellison was when she was no longer defined as Elaine's inconvenient sister. And for the first time in 38 years, that question didn't frighten me. It filled me with a quiet, steady hope. The silence I promised Elaine became the fertile ground where my new life began to grow. It wasn't an empty silence, but a purposeful one. I had spent a lifetime listening to her narrative, absorbing her criticism, and weaving her disdain into the fabric of my own self-worth. Now I had pressed mute on that channel forever. The static was gone, and in the clear, quiet space that remained, I could finally hear my own voice. Recovery was not a straight line. There were days the medication made me feel washed out and slow. There were moments of crushing sadness when I'd reread my mother's letter, grieving not just for her, but for the years of confusion and fear I didn't need to have. But even on those days there was a new core inside me. A spine of steel my mother had seen but I had never felt. I was no longer managing a condition someone had hidden from me. I was caring for a heart I now understood. There was power in that shift. The print shop, the Coastal Press, became more than a business. It became my sanctuary and my proving ground. With Leo's eager help, I started taking on new projects. I designed wedding invitations for a young couple, their joy feeling contagious as I pressed the ornate letters into thick cream paper. I created posters for a local marine conservation group, the deep blues and greens of the inks feeling like an echo of the ocean I walked beside every day. The work was tactile, real. You couldn't argue with a freshly printed page. It was there, solid and beautiful, a testament to focus and craft. Elaine had always seen it as a dusty, sentimental hobby. I now saw it as my legacy. The town of Brighton, in its gentle, unassuming way, began to shift around me. The story had seeped into the community, not as sensational gossip, but as a sobering truth. People didn't ask me prying questions. Instead, they offered small, meaningful gestures. Old Mr. Henderson from the hardware store started delivering my orders himself, always staying to chat about the weather for a few extra minutes. The owner of the Sea Sprite Cafe began packing a little extra soup in my takeout order. For later, it was a quiet, communal understanding. I was not a victim to be pitied. I was a neighbor who had been wronged, and they were subtly, firmly on my side. I learned about Elaine's life only through this same quiet grapevine. Paul Vance kept me informed as a friend, not a detective. Elaine's legal threats had evaporated the moment he formally entered my mother's letter into the file. Her high-priced Portland lawyer, realizing he was defending a client who had not only withheld critical medical information, but had also stolen and concealed a dying wish, had apparently advised a swift retreat. There would be no defamation suit. There would be no charges from me either. The truth, officially documented, was consequence enough. But the truth had social teeth in a town like ours. Mrs. Calloway, my wonderful, brave neighbor, let it be known at her book club, a powerful hub of local information, exactly what she had heard Elaine say on my porch. The story wasn't shouted. It was whispered with solemn disapproval. The result was a subtle, profound exile. Elaine's real estate business, which relied heavily on local referrals and community trust, dried up. A for sale sign appeared outside her sleek condo a month later. Leo told me his mother heard she was moving to Portland, where no one knows her history. I felt no triumph hearing this. I felt a profound, weary sadness. Her jealousy had been a poison she brewed for me, but in the end she was the one who drank it all. She had sacrificed a sister, betrayed a mother's trust, and ultimately destroyed her own standing in the only home she'd ever known. All for the sake of a grudge I never fully understood. Her revenge against a ghost, the idea that I was loved more, had left her utterly alone. That was not a victory, it was a tragedy. As spring began to soften the edges of winter, something else softened in me. The sharp, protective anger mellowed into something like compassion, not for her, but for the twisted path she had chosen. I could pity her from a great and safe distance, without ever wanting her back in my life. One bright, chilly afternoon in March, I was in the shop, experimenting with a new iridescent ink for a series of poetry broadsides. The bell above the door jingled. I looked up, expecting Leo or a customer. It was James, my ex-husband. He stood awkwardly just inside the door, his hands in his coat pockets. He looked older, a little tired, but his eyes were the same kind hazel I remembered. We hadn't spoken since the divorce papers were finalized. "Martha," he said, "you look well." "I am well, James," I said, wiping my hands on a cloth. "What can I do for you?" He took a few steps in, looking around at the presses, the typecases, the new artwork on the walls. "The place looks great. Thriving." He paused, gathering his words. "I heard about everything with Elaine and your heart. I wanted to see for myself that you were okay." The concern in his voice was genuine, and it touched a old, tender place. "I'm okay," I said, and for the first time I believed it completely when I said it to someone else. "It's been a hard road, but I'm on the right path now." He nodded, looking down at his shoes for a moment. I should have seen it more clearly back then. I just saw the drama, the tension. I thought she was just a difficult person. I never imagined it was that. He met my eyes, his full of a quiet regret. "I'm sorry I didn't have the strength to stand up to her. I'm sorry I made you feel like you were the problem for reacting to it." His apology was unexpected. It wasn't owed, but it was a gift. It acknowledged a wound I hadn't even let myself feel. "Thank you for saying that, James." He didn't stay long. He bought a set of note cards, fumbling with his wallet. As he turned to leave, he said, "I'm glad you're choosing yourself, Martha. You always deserved that." After he left, I stood in the middle of my shop, the smell of ink and paper all around me. His words echoed my mother's. "You are far more resilient than you know." The men in my life had faded away, unable to handle the shadow of my sister. But now the shadow was gone and I was still here. Solid. Whole. Myself. The final piece of my healing came with the season's change. On a warm golden day in late April, I took a long, slow walk to the cliffside cemetery where my parents were buried. I hadn't been since before the hospital. I brought 2 things: a single early blooming rose from my garden for my mother, and my mother's letter, safely tucked in a protective sleeve. I knelt by her headstone, the grass cool and damp beneath my knees. I laid the rose down. "Hi, Mom," I whispered, the wind carrying my words away. "I found the letter. I'm so sorry it took me so long." I told her everything then. About the chest pain, the floor, Elaine's cruel refusal, the hospital, Dr. Reed, the hidden compartment. I told her about the medication, the walks, the shop, the kindness of strangers. I told her about the silence and the peace it brought. "You were right," I said, my fingers tracing the engraved letters of her name. "About my heart. In every sense. I'm taking care of it now. I'm not letting anyone minimize my world anymore. Not even me." I took the letter out and held it. Then gently, I folded it and tucked it into the earth at the base of the headstone, right next to the rose. I didn't need to carry the physical paper anymore. Its words were etched into me now, a part of my cellular memory, as permanent as my own heartbeat. It was time to let the paper return to the earth. A secret between a mother and a daughter, its work finally complete. I stood up, my joints protesting slightly, my heart, my flawed, strong beating heart, feeling full and light at the same time. I looked out over the cliffs, to the endless, shimmering Pacific. The scale of it, the timeless roar of the waves, put everything in perspective. My story, with all its pain and betrayal, was just a single small stitch in the vast tapestry of life. But it was my stitch. And I had chosen, with immense difficulty, to make it a stitch of strength, not of suffering. I walked back into town as the afternoon light grew long. I stopped at the Sea Sprite Cafe for a cup of tea. As I sat by the window, a young woman I didn't know approached me hesitantly. She was holding one of the marine conservation posters I had printed. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft. "Are you the artist who made this? It's so beautiful. It captures exactly why we're fighting to protect this coast." I smiled, a real unforced smile that reached my eyes. "I'm the printer," I said. "Thank you. It's important work." As she walked away, I looked around the cafe, at the familiar and unfamiliar faces. I was just Martha Ellison, the printer. Not the fragile sister. Not the victim. Not the dramatic daughter. Just a woman with a past, a trade, and a future she was building one careful, intentional day at a time. My healing didn't come from Elaine's downfall or James's apology, or even the town's support, as precious as that was. It came from the moment I stopped begging for a sister's love and chose my own life instead. It came from crawling toward the door. It came from saying, "Get out." It came from taking the medication, from opening the shop each morning, from feeling the sun on my face during my walks and knowing, deep in my mended heart, that I was enough. The revenge was never mine to take. The universe or karma or simple human decency had handled that. My job was simply to live. And for the first time in 38 years, living felt like more than enough. Felt like a miracle. Thank you for listening till the very end. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. And don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 in the comments. Your words and reactions inspire me more than you can imagine.